The last thing my sister said to me before she drove away wasn't a warning. It wasn't even a proper goodbye, it was a laugh. I keep coming back to that sound. The way it cut through the cold night air somewhere outside of Barrie, Ontario, sharp and bright and completely unbothered, like she'd just told the funniest joke she'd ever heard. And maybe she had. Maybe to her, I was the punchline. I was 31 years old, standing alone at a rest stop off Highway 400 in November, wearing a hoodie that wasn't warm enough, and holding a coffee I'd just bought with the last $2.40 in my coat pocket. My phone was in my sister's car. My wallet was in my sister's car. My overnight bag was in my sister's car. And my sister was already gone. She'd been planning it for months. I found that out later. But on that night, I didn't know anything except that the taillights of her SUV had just disappeared around a curve, and the temperature was dropping fast, and I was completely, utterly alone. I should explain how we got there. My sister and I had been driving back from our aunt's place in Sudbury. A family Thanksgiving weekend that had gone longer than expected, the way family things always do when everyone's pretending everything is fine. There were 6 of us in the original caravan. My sister, her husband, my brother, his girlfriend, and me, the only one without a partner to pull into a side conversation when things got tense. I'd ridden up with my sister because my brother's car was already full, and she'd been perfectly pleasant the whole drive north. Talkative, even. I remember thinking it was a good sign. I remember thinking maybe things were finally getting better between us. They were not getting better. What I didn't know, what I had no way of knowing, was that somewhere between the appetizers and the pumpkin pie, my sister had made a bet with my brother. $400. The exact amount she claimed I still owed her from a loan she'd given me 2 years earlier, during a rough patch when I'd lost my job at the marketing firm and needed help covering rent. I'd paid her back 8 months later, almost to the dollar, but she'd never quite let it go. She liked having it over me. I understand that now. The bet was simple, in the way that cruel things always seem simple when someone else is designing them. She would leave me at a rest stop on the drive home. No phone, no wallet, no way to call anyone. If I made it back to our parents' house in Mississauga by the next morning, without her help, she'd consider us even. If I didn't, if I panicked and broke down and called someone crying, or if I ended up hitchhiking to the nearest OPP station and asking for help, my brother would send her the $400 and they would spend it on a weekend trip to Niagara Falls without me. My brother thought it was funny. His girlfriend apparently raised one small concern and was talked out of it. My aunt didn't know. My parents didn't know. Nobody told me. We'd stopped at a service center off the highway for gas and washrooms. My sister pulled into the Tim Hortons lane and told me she'd grab us both a coffee. I went inside to use the washroom. When I came out, she was standing by the car holding one cup. Just one. She handed it to me with a smile that I'd seen 1,000 times growing up. The smile that meant she knew something I didn't, and said she'd forgotten her debit card inside. Can you run back and grab it? I think I left it at the counter. I went back inside. I looked for 5 minutes. There was no card. When I came back out, her car was gone. I stood there for a long time just looking at the empty parking spot. I think part of me kept expecting her to come back around the corner. She'd done things like this before. Small pranks, embarrassing moments staged for maximum effect, but she'd always come back. She'd always been watching from somewhere nearby, waiting for the reaction. I scanned the parking lot. I looked at every car that pulled through. I walked to the edge of the lot and looked down the highway in both directions. Nothing. Just the dark and the cold and the sound of trucks rushing past. The coffee was getting cold in my hands. The service center had a Tim Hortons and a Subway and a small gift shop that was already closing for the night. There were about a dozen people moving through the space, mostly highway travelers, tired families with restless kids, truck drivers stopping for something warm. I was the only person standing still. I went back inside, not because I had a plan, but because I was cold and I needed to think. The woman behind the Tim Hortons counter, a woman somewhere in her 60s with silver hair and a name tag that said Willa, noticed me lingering near the entrance. I must have looked exactly as bad as I felt, because she asked if I needed something without me having to say anything first. I told her what happened, not all of it. I said my ride had left without me and I didn't have my phone. I didn't explain the rest because I didn't fully understand the rest yet. I just said I wasn't sure what to do. She didn't react with shock or pity. She just nodded, like she'd heard some version of this before, and asked if I wanted a fresh coffee and somewhere to sit while I figured things out. That small kindness almost undid me. I sat in a corner booth and tried to get my thoughts in order. I had $2.40, which was not enough for anything useful. The gift shop sold charging cables, but my phone wasn't there to charge. There was a payphone outside, one of the last ones still standing in Ontario, it felt like. But I didn't know anyone's number by heart. I'd stopped memorizing numbers the year I got my first smartphone, like everyone else. I knew my own number. I knew my parents' landline because my dad had drilled it into my head as a kid for emergencies. I did not know my sister's number. I did not know my brother's number. I didn't know anyone I could reach. The payphone was $1.50 for a local call. The nearest exchange wasn't local. I used the last of my anyway. My parents' landline, it rang 8 times and went to the answering machine. I didn't leave a message. I didn't know what to say. It was 10:47 p.m. I went back inside and sat in the booth until Willa's shift ended at midnight. She came by once more before she left and slid a folded piece of paper across the table. It was a hand-drawn map, rough, practical, the kind you'd sketch on the back of a receipt, showing the nearest town, Cookstown, about 7 kilometers east. She'd written the address of a 24-hour diner on it. "You can't stay here overnight," she said. "They'll ask you to leave around 2. But the people at May's are good people. Tell them Willa sent you." She also left a $5 bill on the table without saying anything about it. I held that $5 bill for a long time. The walk to Cookstown was not 7 kilometers of city sidewalk. It was 7 kilometers of highway shoulder in the dark, in November, in a hoodie. The temperature had dropped to around 4 degrees, which doesn't sound terrible until you're walking into a headwind with wet grass on one side, and transport trucks shaking the ground 3 feet to your left. I kept my hands shoved in my pockets and counted my steps for a while, then stopped counting because it wasn't helping. About halfway there, I tripped on a crack in the asphalt and went down on my knees. I sat there on the gravel shoulder for a minute, hands stinging, jeans torn, and I thought about my sister's face when she'd handed me that coffee cup. The smile, the calm of it, the complete absence of guilt. She'd done this and felt nothing. Or worse, she'd felt pleased. I thought about all the times I'd let things go with her over the years. The birthday she'd forgotten. On purpose, the year I'd gotten a promotion she wanted. The time she'd told our parents I'd borrowed money from her before I'd even had a chance to explain the situation myself. The comment at Christmas 2 years ago about my apartment, my job, my choices, delivered in that light, easy tone she used when she wanted to hurt you but maintained plausible deniability. I'd talked myself out of being angry every single time. I'd told myself she didn't mean it, or she was going through something, or family was complicated, and you had to give people room. I'd given her so much room she'd left me on a highway. I got back up and kept walking. May's Diner in Cookstown was exactly what Willa's map had promised. Small, warm, lit up against the dark, the kind of place that smells like bacon grease and burnt coffee, and somehow makes both of those things feel like safety. A handwritten board near the entrance advertised the overnight special. Eggs, toast, home fries, coffee, for $8.95. I pushed open the door. The man behind the counter was tall and broad-shouldered, with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and a look that took in my torn jeans, my red hands, and my general state without making me feel worse about any of it. He told me his name was George. I told him Willa had sent me. He said, "Sit anywhere you like." I sat at the counter because it felt less lonely than a booth, and George poured me a coffee without asking, and when I explained that I only had $5 and the special was $8.95, he said the special was $5 for people Willa sent him. I said that's not a real price. He said, "It is tonight." I ate everything on the plate. I hadn't realized how hungry I was until the food was in front of me. George didn't push me for conversation, but when things slowed down around 2 in the morning and he came to refill my coffee, I'd been sitting there quietly long enough that I think he felt comfortable asking what happened. So I told him, all of it, this time. He listened without interrupting, which is rarer than it sounds. When I was done, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said something I've thought about many times since. The people who do things like this always tell themselves it's a lesson. But lessons are things you teach people you're rooting for. I didn't respond right away. I just turned that over in my mind. He let me use the diner's landline to try my parents again. This time my dad picked up on the 3rd ring, groggy and confused, and I heard my mom's voice in the background asking what was wrong. I told him where I was. He said he was coming. While I waited, I sat at that counter and went through everything I'd been telling myself for years. That my sister was just difficult. That all families had sharp edges. That I was too sensitive, too quick to take things personally. My sister had told me those things so often that I'd stopped questioning whether she was right. Sitting in that diner at 2 in the morning, cold and tired and clear, in a way I hadn't been in years, I started questioning. She had told our parents I was bad with money before I'd had the chance to explain my situation. She had undermined every job I'd applied for in the years when I was trying to rebuild. She had made small comments at gatherings about my cooking, my apartment, my weight, my relationship history, in that casual tone that made it impossible to object to without looking oversensitive. Every time I'd started to feel settled or confident, something had happened to knock me back down. A comment, a comparison, a reminder of what I still didn't have. I had believed it was just how she was. I hadn't let myself see that it was a pattern, that the bet, the rest stop, the planned humiliation. None of it was random. It was the same thing she'd always been doing, just louder. My dad arrived at Maze just past 3 in the morning. He'd driven straight from Mississauga without stopping. He came in the door already looking around for me, and when he found me at the counter, the look on his face, somewhere between relief and fury, told me he already knew more of the story than I'd told him on the phone. Apparently my brother had called him an hour after my sister drove away. He hadn't been able to sit on it. We drove back mostly in silence. My dad isn't a man who talks through things in the moment. He processes, and then he talks. So I looked out the window at the highway and tried to organize what I was feeling into something manageable. I wasn't sure I could. By the time we got home, my mom was up and waiting. She'd made tea, which is what she does when she doesn't know what else to do, and she sat across from me at the kitchen table and listened while I went through the whole night again. She cried at the part about the payphone. I hadn't expected that. My sister was not there. She'd gone home to her own house. My parents called her in the morning. I don't know exactly what was said. I was in my old bedroom, trying to sleep, listening to the muffled shapes of voices through the wall, but I heard my mother's voice go very quiet at one point, which is worse than when she raises it. I heard my dad use my sister's full name, which he only does when there is no room left for misunderstanding. My sister came over that afternoon. She walked in looking composed, already building her explanation, already shaping the story into something softer. She said she'd thought I'd figure it out quickly. She said she'd been watching from down the road. She said it was just a joke and she'd never actually expected me to walk 7 kilometers in the dark. She said a lot of things. I let her finish. Then I put my phone on the table and played back the voicemail my brother's girlfriend had sent me. From my brother's phone, without his knowledge, recorded the night of the bet. Their voices, clear and laughing, talking about where they'd leave me, how long they thought I'd last, what they'd spend the money on. My sister's voice, certain and cheerful. She'll be calling someone in 20 minutes, I guarantee it. The room went very still. I looked at my sister and I didn't feel angry in the way I'd expected. I felt something quieter than that. A kind of resignation, but not the defeated kind. The kind that comes after you've finally accepted something you'd been avoiding for a long time. I said, "I'm not doing this anymore." She started to respond. I kept going. I told her that I was done explaining myself to her, done softening things, done sitting at family dinners, pretending her comments were harmless, and her intentions were good, and that I was the problem for noticing. I told her that I had walked 7 kilometers in 4-degree weather with $2.40, and I had been treated more decently by strangers in a diner than I had been by my own family in years, and I was done pretending that was acceptable. I told her that if she tried to frame this story differently to other family members, to mutual friends, to anyone, I had the recording, and I wasn't above using it. Then I picked up my phone and I left, not the house. That came later. I left the room, walked out to the backyard, and stood in the cold for a while just breathing. My dad came out a few minutes after and stood beside me without saying anything. After a bit he put his hand on my shoulder. That was enough. It took me a few more months to work out the practical details of fully stepping back from my sister. We had shared family events, shared parents, a whole calendar of occasions where we'd be expected to be in the same room. I couldn't just disappear, and I didn't want to blow up my parents' lives in the process of protecting my own. But I started setting limits, in a way I'd never let myself do before. I stopped explaining my choices to her. I stopped softening my responses. When she made comments, I let them land, and then I moved on without acknowledging them, which turned out to be the one thing that actually seemed to unsettle her. She was used to me reacting, used to me shrinking or justifying or apologizing. When I stopped doing those things, she didn't know what to do with me. I found a therapist that January, a woman in Oakville who specialized in family dynamics, and about 3 sessions in, she said something that rearranged things for me. She said, "The reason this kept working on you is because you genuinely loved her. People who don't care don't spend this much energy trying to understand." I thought about that for a long time. I thought about the drive to Sudbury, when I'd sat in the passenger seat thinking things were finally getting better. The hope of that. The real, earnest, uncomplicated hope that the people I came from were capable of changing. That hope had never been stupid. It had just been pointing at the wrong thing. What I needed to protect wasn't the relationship. It was myself. By spring, I'd started looking at apartments. Not because I was running away. I'd had my own place for years, I wasn't living at home. But because I'd been unconsciously building my life in radius of my family, choosing neighborhoods near theirs, taking jobs in the city they were in, organizing my time around dinners and visits, and a sense of proximity that I'd called closeness. I started to think about what it would look like to expand that radius, to choose a city based on what I wanted instead of who I was trying to stay near. I applied for a position in Vancouver that October. I got it. I told my parents first. My dad nodded slowly and said he was proud of me. My mom cried and then immediately started looking up flights. I told my sister by text 2 days later, short and factual. She didn't respond for a week. When she did respond, it was a long message. Apologetic, in the way that people are apologetic when they're hoping forgiveness will restore things to what they were. She said she knew she'd gone too far. She said she'd been dealing with things she hadn't told anyone. She said she missed me. She said she hoped I knew she loved me. I read it twice. I didn't respond for 3 days. When I did, I kept it short. I told her I heard her, and I was glad she was dealing with what she needed to deal with, and I hoped she found her way to a better place. But I didn't tell her things were okay. I didn't offer reassurance I didn't have. I didn't make it easier. I moved to Vancouver in November, 1 year almost to the day after she left me on that highway. The life I have there is quieter than the one I'd built in the shadow of my family. I have a small apartment near Commercial Drive with good light and a landlord who fixes things promptly. I have colleagues I actually like. I have a Saturday morning routine that belongs entirely to me. Coffee, the farmer's market on Trout Lake, a walk if the weather holds, which in Vancouver it sometimes doesn't. My parents visit twice a year. My dad has started sending voice memos instead of texts, which is new and endearing. My mom learned how to video call, and now does it every Sunday without fail. My sister and I don't talk much. A text on birthdays. A brief exchange at Christmas when I come home. Careful and surface level. 2 people navigating the same space without stepping on each other. It is not warm. It is not what I used to hope it could be. But it is honest. And honest, I've learned, is something I can build from. The night on that highway shoulder, the gravel under my knees, the cold in my hands, the truck lights washing over me in the dark. I used to think of it as the worst night of my life. Now I think of it differently. Not as something that was done to me. As the night I finally stopped accepting things that were wrong because they were familiar. Willa doesn't know she gave me back something that evening. George doesn't know either. They were just people being decent in small ways, the way people often are when you're not surrounded by the noise of family expectation. But the contrast between what a stranger offers you when you're in trouble and what someone who claims to love you is capable of doing, that contrast was the most clarifying thing that had ever happened to me. It cost me a knee bruise, a torn pair of jeans, and 7 kilometers of cold Ontario highway to understand that I had never needed my sister's approval to survive. I just needed to believe that myself.